Back. Haven't seen you in a couple weeks.
I know it's been a busy summer.
It has. I was in the great city of Omaha.
Omaha,
It was
what's down
wonderful.
there?
Big baseball tournament. It's called the College World Series.
Ah, that's I actually caught some of that on TV. I was not aware that it was as big of an event as it is. It
It,
was huge, big production.
it is something special, and I can tell you from dealing with the parking in Omaha, I wish they focused a little more on flow.
Yeah, you're a big baseball guy, though, right?
I am. I
Yeah,
enjoy.
that's why you're
I
so bad
enjoy
at
the
golf.
baseball.
Hey,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said that's why you're so bad at golf.
That's well. There's a lot of reasons I'm bad at golf. That just happens to be one of them. But we're not here to discuss that
Uh,
today. Let's get into it, Eric. Last couple weeks ago, last time we were together, you beat me up on why not have a distributed sales team. And as usual, I won the arguments. And this week I thought I would give you a little bit of a layup. And I kind of have a belief that Scrum is supposed to be agile and quick moving and not have all these prescribed roles, but Scrum tells me that I have to have a product owner and a Scrum master, and there's these specific artifacts and all of these rules that have to be go. That's just not agile. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I think I think we probably most of us listening probably have the intuition that whether or not you have a product owner role or Scrum Master role isn't really the point. But let's start with the Steelman case for this. Why does Scrum define in such specificity the fact that there's these three accountabilities on the team? Right? There's product owner, Scrum Master, and developers. That's what Scrum has always talked about since day one. But yeah, it does seem very, very specific. I'll answer that for everybody, obviously, but I'm curious, like as an outsider, Scrum outsider, what's been your experience when you've had to interact with somebody who says, "Hey, I'm the product owner"?
You know, it's funny. I don't consider myself an outsider, so thanks for pushing me out there, but that's fine.
Well, I mean, like not product developer, right?
Yeah, I think the first interaction I really had with a product owner was as a stakeholder, and following the rules that I don't get my way always was very interesting. And I'm generally used to getting my way, so that was a unique challenge.
Yeah.
And frankly, the first couple times I had to deal with it, it was very frustrating that a product owner was telling me no, and I'm saying we're sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why are you telling me no? And that was my first interaction and the first frustration point until I really understood it.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you ever had to deal with a Scrum Master as a stakeholder? Have you ever had a kind of conversations where a Scrum Master came to you and as a Scrum Master and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something"?
yeah, many times, but usually it's, hey, one of the other stakeholders is trying to interrupt our flow. I need
Ah,
some help. And most of my early interactions before I learned Scrum and went through courses and all of that was with the product owner, just as a stakeholder sitting aside.
that makes
And
sense.
then generally once I bought into and was accepted inside the world of Scrum,
You are.
most of my interactions were with the Scrum Master was, hey, one of the other stakeholders isn't understanding. Could you help me?
Okay.
And it was a lot about injections and understanding, hey, there's only so much work that can get done in a given week. We all need to sit down and figure out what's coming out if you want this in.
Sure. Okay.
Um,
So the uh, a long time ago, and by a long time ago, I mean like the 80s and 90s when I started doing product development. Probably you probably weren't born until sometime in the 90s, I'm guessing, right?
1983, but thanks.
So sometime in the 90s, the old way of doing product development was ripe with let's call them opportunities for improvement, and I say that very sarcastically. We were not very good. I mean, look, in retrospect, we're always doing the best we can, but we were not very good at product development 30, 40 years ago. So when Scrum was created, there's these two very specific accountabilities, product ownership and Scrum mastering, that were created to solve some very specific problems in product development. So let's start with the product owner. One of the things that we used to see all of the time in companies doing product development was that there would be 4 or 5 people sitting on some sort of committee, steering committee, something like that. And all 4 or 5 people, or however, I mean, sometimes 3, sometimes 12 people on a committee would have to agree in order to make a decision and move the product forward. And it just took forever. What was that?
If it moved at all.
If it moved at all, right? Or it would, politics would come in more and more into play, right? Like the loudest voice won, or the highest paid person in the room won, or something like that. The product owner kind of removes that struggle wholesale, right? Now we're saying one person is in charge of making those types of decisions. So the decisions can be made very, very quickly. And you might ask, like, well, whoa. We want all of those. We want the 12 people on the committee to have a say. We want their expertise. They're there for a reason. Why would we ever just put this in the hands of one person? And that's maybe a longer explanation, but suffice it to say for now that another thing you get for using Scrum is risk mitigation, right? This person isn't making one decision that's going to stand for 7 years of the product's lifetime. They're making one decision that's going to stand for one sprint, right? And if they're wrong about it, we'll all know, next Friday at our sprint review or something like that. So the scope of these decisions are a little bit smaller, and there's a chance for everybody, including that original committee, to inspect and adapt those decisions at a sprint review. There's all sorts of other things for product ownership that used to go bad back in the day. Things like people that are on the development team having to go to 3 or 4 different places in order to find work, right? We had one user requirements document, one technical requirements document, one regulatory and compliance document. We had a separate bug tracker. We had a separate risk mitigation spreadsheet. Like, we had all of these different places that we had to find work. And because structure trumps culture, just threw that one in there for you. We'll get to that Steelman argument one of these days, I'm sure. But because structure trumps culture, as soon as we had different places to store this different work, different processes were created around those different places, right? And the obvious one that we see all the time is with bug trackers. There's almost always a process surrounding your bug tracker that says severity 2 defects must be fixed within 3 weeks or something like that. That is a completely arbitrary rule. It's not based on value. It's not based on the context of the product. We need to strip away all of those rules from all of those different places. And we put it in the hands of the product owner to put all of the dev team's work in one place. We call that the product backlog, and we ask the product owner to order it linearly. So it gets rid of multiple places of work, gets rid of a committee trying to decide as a committee and slowing things down. And it gets rid of the fact that it gets rid of this idea that there could be 15 number one priorities. There can't. There can only be one.
Yeah, let me jump in there too, because this happens across organizations. When there's many priorities, there's no priorities. And when you have 15 people thinking there's 15 different priorities, you're making 1 inch across 15 things, which means you're starting a lot of things but not finishing anything.
Mm-hmm. You're putting more cars on the freeway in Omaha.
But even if that wasn't true, and it is, the larger problem is the amount of waste it takes to make a decision on what's next. And finding that work is just hours of non-productive work, non-value-added work. It's waste.
Yeah, preaching to the converted here. I think decision-making and delays in decision-making cost companies way more than the efficiency of coding or the efficiency of product teams or anything like that.
And let's take that above development. Think about how many leadership meetings you sat on where there's deferred decisions, or hey, let's go test 84 different things instead of saying, hey, we're going to focus on this for this week or 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Let's take sales, for instance, or marketing. Hey, we're going to have 20 niches instead of 1. We're going to have 20 targets. Let's see if we can move the ball on all of these.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't, the delayed decision process and the lack of focus is one of the number one business killers there is.
Yeah. So let's just stick with the product owner for a second and just ask the opposite question then. So that's the Steelman case. The position of product owner, and I'm sure I'll get yelled at for calling it a position, but let's just be honest. When most organizations are forming these teams, it is one person in this position acting as product owner.
There's another Steelman argument for that position. It's hard to adopt and transition and do change management with these things without some of the steps being prescribed. If the first thing you have to do in change management is adopt the theory and all the mindset and all the knowledge that goes with it, it's hard to make the transition. So there is value.
I think what you're saying is structure trumps culture.
I believe structure, culture, and strategy all work together.
Okay.
Without all three, you have none.
But you have a point, right? Like the pushback against these ideas of like, what, Scrum isn't agile. It has these very specific rules that it mandates and things like that. Okay, fine. If we want to get into a room, if an organization wants to get into a room, really talk about what we need here and base it on agile values and principles and create their own framework and process for how to do product development, I'm 100% fine with that. The issue is that getting everybody in that room to adopt that agile mindset is a philosophy problem. And philosophy problems are really hard to solve. Culture is really hard to create out of the ether inside of an organization. It's really easy. Follow this process. Do it now in order to learn why we're doing it. You may not understand why on day one. Do it, but go through the motions in order to understand why we're doing it. And then once we understand why we're doing it, perhaps we start changing some of it to benefit ourselves.
Yeah, there's an old saying in sales that says you have to learn all the rules so you know when and how to break them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I do think there's one other area of just human psychology that we have to bring in here when we talk about this is habits are really hard to break.
Yeah.
And the better way to deal with habits is not to go from 0 to 100 with starting a new habit or from 100 to 0. It's to put in systems and structure that allow that culture to flourish so that when somebody steps out of that culture, there's a system in place. And I look at it and say, is it easier to bowl the first time with bumpers or is it easier to bowl the first time with gutters? And if I have a choice, let's put the bumpers up. Why make this hard? You don't get extra points. And you're not training for anything. So let's take the first step and make it as easy as possible. Give yourself the guide rails.
Yeah, I like that. So that's the Steelman argument for product owners. Out in the wild with more mature organizations, we are starting to see that this role is either going away or it's distributed. The things that a product owner would do, like keeping an ordered and well-refined backlog, still happen. It's just that there isn't one person wearing one hat that says PO. There's maybe 2 or 3 people on the team that are sharing that responsibility.
So you're moving back towards the committee.
And that, but I think the difference is on the team, right? We're saying instead of having a committee and a product owner, we're saying, hey, we need a lot of different people on this team. We need some product managers and we need some product strategists and some product marketers and people from and some business analysts and some people from all sorts of different lowercase p product backgrounds. And if they're all on the team together, do we really have to anoint one as a product
Eric, but you know the argument against that. Which is? Who settles the argument when they disagree?
Yep. You have that issue.
Answer it.
That's it. No, you have to struggle with that issue, right? The difference being that you're not struggling with that issue on a committee outside of the team. You're struggling with that issue between members of the team and making a decision. By the way, this is no different than what happens even if you have one product owner, right? There's still other people on the team that are going to disagree with you, that are going to say things like, we should really do B before A.
Yeah, I do want to jump in here.
As a product owner, or if you just have the product ownership responsibilities distributed among a few people on the team, you're always going to have to wrestle with it.
And I think this is where some of the soft skills come into play. Who's the one that's going to ease that tension? Who's the few that are going to say, hey, look, let's put the team above the individual. Doesn't matter if you're right, let's run.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a successful team, that'll all balance each other out. And when you haven't got a healthy culture, that structure could blow up.
And remember, I started this by saying like more mature organizations are doing this. When this works, when not having a product owner and still doing Scrum works, it's because the organization and the team especially does have an agile mindset. They do understand the values and principles that we're trying to enact.
Yeah,
They are really good at getting done product out the door already. These are not teams learning how to do this.
Yeah, I want to jump in
Teams
here
that need training wheels or bumpers, right?
because I think what we're talking about now is a checklist of things that have to be in place before you can go to a distributed product owner or a distributed Scrum Master. And there's some things from leadership that I think have to be in place here too. Transparency, like for Scrum or Agile to work, even in the guide rail form, much less this form, you have to have just transparency.
Yeah.
And I always laugh when we talk about maximization. And, everybody always says sales cures all evils. Go get more sales. What's the right amount of sales? Well, it's however many you could get. And it's just such a false mindset. When you're working on teams like this, there are going to be individuals that are sub-optimized.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have those arguments, a lot of times the people are arguing for what's best for their fiefdom or their personal stake. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the structure and culture in place to recognize when somebody is not 100% productive, but is 70% productive, and that's good for the team, and that's good for the whole, his 70% productive means that the team is better off. If you don't have that stuff in place, the distributed model is going to really struggle.
Yeah.
That is one of the things that I think would be an item you have to have. You have to have transparency, both in terms of how decisions are made and the data that's necessary for those decisions, but also in how people get recognized and rewarded.
Yeah.
You and I both know that there's organizations out there trying to find a way to reward based on lines of code.
I haven't seen lines of code in a couple years, but every time I do see it reminds me of, I don't know, PTSD and nightmare material. But I did just last week. I saw a private equity firm that just acquired a small tech company. Request of the CIO of the company, metrics like stories per developer and defects per developer. So like there are some of these things that are still out there that are suboptimal.
Yeah, maybe
which brings us, that I told that story for a reason, which brings us to the Scrum Master role. Why do we need this role?
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so similar to product owner, when Scrum was created 20 years ago now, we're trying to correct some very specific things in product development. So there's kind of like one general bucket, which is Scrum is going to be something new. It's going to be a new way of working, a new way of operating, a new way of thinking about product development. We should probably have some help. And the Scrum Master is there for that kind of generalized help. But the other very specific thing is, in most organizations, there isn't a position that can operate at the team level and the management level and the product level and try to stitch all of these things together. In most organizations, that's done by meetings and talking about it. And it's really nobody's responsibility to curate the whole system. And that's really what a Scrum Master's responsibility is. And I know a lot of organizations, especially organizations that are new to Agile, they see the Scrum Master as somebody who helps the team do the team thing, but has never been and never will be what we need out of a position like a Scrum Master. The point of the Scrum Master role is not only to serve the team, but also serve the product and the organization. So when we have some of these weird things that happen in organizations, like, hey, you know what, we should really be tracking, number of user stories per coder. The Scrum Master is well positioned to talk to management about what would actually happen at the team level if we did that, and whether or not those outcomes get what management is actually after. So there is a place for this kind of full-time dedicated role position of Scrum Master, especially for organizations that are a little bit newer to Agile or Scrum. But again, that's a Steelman. Again, we do see in teams that are, a little bit more mature than that, we see the Scrum Master role maybe going away a little bit. We see, and you and I have actually been on a team where almost everybody on the team had extensive Scrum knowledge, and anybody could have been the Scrum Master. And instead, the Scrum Master didn't really help the team do the team things. The Scrum Master, in this case, spent most of their time helping the product owner or helping the organization or being a conduit between different people. So it's one of those roles where we need all of this stuff to happen. One person can do it, multiple people can do it. But again, the key is if you're not going to have one person do it, you better be a very, very mature team. Like everybody better understand what it is we're after here.
Well, and the other thing that I think that we need on that checklist is the empowerment of every individual to speak in a very frank, powerful way with leadership.
Yeah.
And I think that's to me, the power of the Scrum Master was, they had authority, not true authority to manage things and push back. And
they were expected to, right? Like in a good, healthy, agile organization, if you're in a position of management, you should expect to chat with your Scrum Master, multiple Scrum Masters on multiple products, on multiple teams. You should expect these folks to come to you to figure stuff out at the organizational level that they don't have the power to fix at the team level, right? How do we fund projects? Why are we measuring defects per developer? Like all of these kind of bigger issues are things that Scrum Masters ought to get in your face about in a nice way, obviously, but somebody's got to be owning these kind of larger organizational changes, and it's not management, right? Because they don't see what happens at the team level.
I want to jump in there because we're talking about this Steelman argument. What I thought probably starts to look like more of a gradient, if you will, or a scale. At the start, you have somebody that's spending a lot of time doing Scrum Master work, but as the organization adjusts to agile mindset, they probably are needed a little bit less. And then as everybody becomes mature in the organization, you have everybody acting as a Scrum Master that can throw a flag on the play.
Sure.
And say, hey, wait a minute. And that I'm trying to do what Scrum did for development and sales. And one of the organizations I was working with this morning, basically, we have a Scrum Master, but somebody else threw the flags, basically arguing, let's take a look at these KPIs we're working on. We know why we put them on, but are these still the relevant numbers for us?
Yeah.
And to your point, it's about working through, the defects per program, or why do we have this? What is it achieving? And once you get a healthy organization and each individual feels empowered enough to stand up, you can move past a specific role like that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think on the organizational level, that might be harder. Like at what point are we going to say that the organization is mature? But at the team level, this is what happens. This is how teams mature, actually. Right? They start with a Scrum Master that's spending the majority of their time helping the team be a team, helping the team learn Scrum if they're new to it, operate the Scrum framework, get to done, helping the team understand some of the values and principles behind this, the importance of a done increment, things like that. And then after a while, that team doesn't need much more help, at least not much more like specific direction. Yeah. So that individual can go and work with the product or the organization management. Like they can go and work on other things. They don't have to be the one sitting there, drawing a sailboat on the whiteboard and facilitating a retrospective. We don't need a specific person to do that in a mature team.
In a mature team, and here's what I would ask you. But when we say mature organization, what we're talking about in an organization is a series of teams working together. Mm-hmm. And the mature organization, to me, the entire set of teams now is mature to that point. And specifically, the leadership team is using these methodologies. To me,
sure. I think the wrinkle in this for me is that I think it's pretty easy inside of a couple months to get a team from 0 to Scrum, but there's going to be so many other things surrounding that team in the organization that negatively impact that team's ability to deliver valuable product.
Can I ask you a question?
And it's all of the things that we deal with, right? Like, how do we fund projects? Why are we doing 85 experiments? Why are we doing this way of go to market instead of this way? All of those types of questions are not things that the team can just decide.
And we're at 25 minutes, so I think we're on the same page. I think we covered the Steelman argument, and I've got one for us for next week.
Okay.
Why isn't every team operating on Scrum principles?
Principles? Okay, let's talk about that one.
We're not digging into this week.
We're not. I won't fight. But so let's think about that for next week. Do you mean principles? Do you mean framework? Do you think every team needs to have a product backlog and a definition of done? Or do you really mean that every team should be working in short iterations and inspecting what they're doing?
Yes.
Both. Okay. That's a great discussion. So next week, Scrum is just for software.
Scrum is just for the organization.
Scrum is just for okay. The the history. I think we did one on Scrum is just for software, right? So your question is why don't we just use Scrum as the operating system everywhere?
Why isn't the leadership team using Scrum meetings? Why aren't we doing a retrospective? Why aren't we doing a planning meeting? All right, let's wind up.
Yeah. All right. That really has my head turning now, actually. So what we talked about today, Scrum has these specific roles. They were there for a purpose. They help new teams get from 0 to agile pretty quickly. And if these very specific, hyper-specific roles start to blend out a little bit into other people on the team, and the team is still getting done product out the door all the time, you're not really going to hear much complaining from me. I think in more mature teams, especially the PO role tends to be distributed. In more mature teams, the Scrum Master role doesn't really tend to be distributed between people, but the Scrum Master role tends to be diminished on the team. The Scrum Master spends less time with the team, more time with management, figuring out larger organizational issues.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I would add to this is that this model only works if leadership has bought into it.
Any model only works if leadership has bought into it.
Yeah, well, way to make my point less relevant.
Which is why structure trumps culture.
We can do that one soon too.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Nice talking to you, Jeff.
We'll see you soon.
Hey, who won the College World Series?
Ole Miss.
Old Miss. All right. I guess I'm an Old Miss fan.
OLE, not old. Ole.
Okay. Why did they name it Ole?
Oh, just shut down the stream already.
I don't know anything about sports. That's why we're here to talk about Scrum. We'll see you next week.
Yes.
All right. Bye, Jeff.